morning, everyone, the candidates and all the residents who signed in. It's wonderful to see you all. This is Marty Langland. I'm the chair of the election committee here, have been for a few years now. And it's a pleasure to do the 2020 Meet the Candidates Forum. I'd like to welcome all the residents and welcome all the candidates. And our moderator tonight is one of our wonderful election committee members, Haley Seufer. Lori Mitchell is our timekeeper, and thank you, Lori, for keeping us on schedule through this. And let's just go over the procedures very quickly. Each of the candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening presentation. And then we will go to the residents' comments and questions. And you'll have, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. Each question will go to all 4 candidates. You have 2 minutes to answer. If any of the candidates would like to respond to what their colleagues have to say, we can do a follow-up 1 minute round of responses, and then we'll go on to the next question. At the end of the question period, I know have a lot of questions from folks, which is wonderful. Each candidate at the end will have a 1 minute, and then our moderator, Haley, will thank you all, residents and candidates alike, for participating and close the meeting. Niles will be assisting as our co-host on the tech side. Niles, our new village manager, thank you very much for your tech support here. And Niles will be recording the session so that the audio will be available on the village website. I hope by tomorrow, maybe even late tonight. So with that, let me just welcome everybody again. Thank you, candidates, for running for office. Thank you all the residents who are concerned about our village and care enough to show up tonight and take part. And with that, Haley, I'm going to turn it over to you and have a wonderful time as the moderator. I think we've got a great group here tonight. Haley, all yours.
Okay, I'm just going to start. Thank you so much for everyone who's joining. I want to start by thanking Marty for her fearless leadership of this election committee. And I'd like to also thank my other committee members here with us tonight, Lori, Jesse, Lauren, am I missing anyone?
That is all.
Okay, and of course we have Marty's leadership. Thank you. So as Marty explained, we will start with 2 minutes openings. We're going to go in alphabetical order, and then we'll continue to kind of change it up slightly. We'll start with Arthur, go to Jeff, Monty, and Susan. From there, we'll go Jeff, Monty, Susan, Arthur. So I'll put in the chat, in the message.
Charging started, battery level 26%.
But we'll stick with that order, just kind of rotating who goes first. As Marty said, we'll have 2 minute responses at the 30-second point, and this is really more for our candidates. Lori will hold up a yellow card at 30 seconds, and then when time is up, Lori will hold up a red card. And if you really go over your time, you'll get the bell. Okay. So that's how we're going to do this. And we're going to alternate between the written questions that have been submitted, and we have a lot of them, thank you, and giving everyone who's joined tonight an opportunity to ask questions as well. If you're not speaking, please do mute, because we can hear things in your house, dogs, paper, whatever it might be. Okay, so we will start with that, unless there were any questions. We will start with the 2 minute opening statements. So we will start with Arthur. From there, we'll go Jeff, Monty, and then Susan. So over to you, Arthur, for your 2 minutes.
Okay. Hi. My name is Arthur Alexander, and I approve this message. When I was first elected 10 years ago, I barely knew what a Martin's Additions was. Now, somehow a decade has progressed, and I know a lot more. Now, my first reaction on hearing that would be to throw the rascals out. But let me say a few words now on behalf of rascals. In the last few days, for example, there's been a discussion on the listserv of vehicle speeds on local streets. Many agree the speed limit of 20 miles an hour is unsafe, and that's probably correct. For example, the city planner that the village hired to work with the walkability task force came to exactly the same conclusion. He drove down the streets at 20 miles an hour, and he told us the other day when at our meeting, this was way too fast for conditions. However, 20 miles an hour is the lowest legal speed that we're allowed to impose. Now, how do I know that? I learned it over the past 10 years as a member of the council. What else can we legally do to reduce speed? Speed bumps, already have them. Rumble strips, more signs, one-way restrictions, chicanes. This was suggested by our traffic engineers. These are engineered curbs, but with those you lose parking spaces. People don't want one-way restrictions. It's not a new problem. Experience helps here. However, what I do know from all my experience on the council is that we need evidence, we need investigation of alternatives before spending village money on solutions that may not work or that residents do not want. What I've learned is that usually solutions to real problems require serious deliberation, investigation, evidence, thought, speaking to residents, speaking to experts. Ultimately, sometimes there may not be a solution. My underlying message is that experience can make a difference. I welcome your vote for this particular rascal. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Over to you, Jeff.
First of all, thank you all so much. Really just want to thank the committee for all they've done in such a short period of time as volunteers to really set something up like this. I think we all recognize these are not business as usual times. And so if you probably asked me about 6 months ago or so when thinking about running for election, it probably wasn't the first thing on my mind. I'm going to be honest about that. But what has always been on my mind is how much we love our community. And my wife, myself, my daughter, Rosie, we moved here back in about 2013 for all the reasons why we believe you are on this call right now, is to both preserve and protect the things that we care most about, our community. We know that over the past year and more, there have been some things that have impacted us that we've seen the community listserv be very active on, such as our safety. Arthur, you know, certainly I would never compete with your service or longevity on the board, but I see myself as someone who is a fast learner when it comes to all the different things that the current members have worked on. Preparedness. Listen, I think we all recognize the times we're in, and they call for us to, as a community, rise up perhaps in ways that we haven't had to really do so before. And perhaps will be a period where in several months, maybe we could be hopeful to go back where we were. But I think, frankly, just having someone who's been in public health, I think we have to recognize that it may be even longer than that. So I really am so encouraged. I can't tell you the different folks who reached out to me when I first started to talk about a buddy system, and just the number of responses around that and the caring community that we have really just heartens me. And so that was part of the reason why I'm running. But there's the other side of this as well, which is what are the things that we really want to think about as a community going forward? And so I think those are the things in terms of engaging the community, listening and learning from you all, and then working with other members of the council with their experience to really effectuate those. And with that, I see that I'm getting my time card, so I'm going to defer to the next candidate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Monty.
Hi, my name is Monty Boland. I live at 3405 Turner Lane. I've been living in Chevy Chase intermittently for the last 31 years. You know, my wife and I originally lived in Silver Spring for a few years, moved here as of 2017. We're thrilled with living here as residents of Martin's Addition. I think most residents here knew me.
Nope, sorry, hit the wrong thing.
So, myself getting involved with the restoration of the Shepherd Park water fountain, which is still ongoing, but I was able to raise close to $4,000 to refurbish that, replace that, which essentially we have that money in the county coffers right now. And I've been kind of engaging, local politicians on all levels, between Andrew Friedson, both in person, over the phone. His scheduler recognizes the sound of my voice, as does the governor's office, Governor Hogan, the governor's intergovernmental affairs team, state representatives, delegates. So I've really put a lot of energy into refurbishing the park and improving the park. I've met with a number of park planners, project managers, plumbers, you name it, on site at the park. So that's something I kind of pride myself on, and something I'm going to continue to do. I definitely want to get that fountain installed. I realize that's not on VMA land, but I think we all use the park. But aside from that, what is really driving me is to improve public safety, to get a more connected community, via like a networking group, and also to be online and kind of bring us, I don't want to say out of the Stone Age, but so that we're all connected, and not just through email blasts. And then, it's something else I want to do is additional events. And I know I'm just kind of skimming across the surface now. And, there's some other things I'm going to mention later, but that's kind of why I'm running in a nutshell.
Thank you, Monty. There will be plenty of opportunity for everyone to talk about their ideas throughout the questions, and you have closing remarks as well. Susan, over to you for your 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Fadig. I've lived in VMA for 30 years and have been on the VMA Council for the past 4.5 years. I'm running for re-election for 2 reasons: to continue our streak of successful achievements and to further VMA's progress in other areas, including environmental initiatives. One of our residents recently noted that Arthur and I are part of one of the most successful VMA councils in history. Many long-term projects, such as street paving, new street lights, leaf vacuuming, and the composting program, have been accomplished on our watch. We've managed the village funds responsibly and have maintained healthy reserves, which should serve us well in uncertain economic times ahead. One of the initiatives that I'd like to consider in the future is an environmental committee, which might work toward a Sustainable Maryland certification. And we can discuss that at greater length if anyone's interested. The November 2019 VMA annual survey indicated that the vast majority of respondents are satisfied or even very satisfied with village operations and services. If reelected, I will work to continue this tradition. Thank you.
Great, thank
And
you.
I'll save that time for later.
Great, well, thank you for staying within the time limit. And as a reminder, now we're going to enter the question and answer portion. We will alternate between written questions and questions from our neighbors attending the forum. And we'll start with a written question.
Download
Like
starting.
The candidates to keep the response to 2 minutes, please.
Download starting.
I think that we'll actually start with the current pandemic that we're all facing. As some of the candidates have mentioned, none of us could have expected this. And we've all, I think to a degree, looked to each other for comfort, for support, for help at these times. So the first question, I'm going to combine it with a question that was sent in, has to do with caring for each other. The question starts as follows. If elected to the council, what would you do to ensure that we are there for each other in times of crisis like this, and to be a more caring neighbor to those around you? And the second part of it has to do with our village staff. There is concern about the village staff amidst this pandemic. Does VMA provide sick leave, health insurance, disability insurance, and other benefits in line with local governments? If not, what would you do about it if you were on the council? So we will start with Jeff. From there, we'll go to Monty, Susan, and Arthur. So over to you, Jeff, for a response.
Thank you for those questions. I mean, obviously very timely and a very important topic. So let's start with the current situation and where we head. This is something that I deal with on a daily basis in terms of my background in public health and the office that I work in. So for me, going global and concentrating on the local is exactly why I want to be on this phone conversation. As discussed, I would certainly strengthen our network, our buddy system, but take it to another level. Some have suggested formulating new committees. I'm not entirely sure if that's the best forum, but certainly perhaps a task force or group of concerned citizens and neighbors where we'd focus on preparedness and safety. And that would include, we have street captains, but what we need to do is upgrade that system and also be aware of how we can really be in touch with one another in a more time responsive way as we continue to go through this. The other piece is community service. We live fortunately in an environment and a neighborhood that there are many neighbors who are concerned about the surrounding, not only within our Martins Additions, but also within Montgomery County and broader. I serve on the board for the Wharton Business School Alumni Association and in the regional. And what we do is we focus on connecting local businesses around community service. And I'd look to do that also within our community of how taking examples of things that are being done now and perhaps broaden those. In terms of the issues around staff and making sure that they have the proper and they're secure and also the policies, I'd work with other members on the council to do an evaluation of do they actually have the latest policies? And if not, work very closely to make sure that they do, because the safety of the village manager and staff are paramount. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty.
Yeah, so I would say I would kind of agree with Jeff there in terms of assigning, street captains or 14, designated street representatives to call, check in on, every resident within their respective street in times of crisis like this. And, alternatively, if that wasn't an agreed upon solution, it could fall on the council collectively, as well as the village manager, given that's a lot of phone calls for a small number of people. But I think between those two solutions, that would be it. And then in terms of, I spoke of, connecting on LinkedIn because I know we have a Facebook group that was set up. I know a lot of us aren't on Facebook anymore. I know personally, I haven't been on there for 10 years. I think some of us have kind of aged out of that. But I have found in terms of personally connecting with neighbors has been successful on LinkedIn. A lot of us are employed, self-employed, even recently retired seem to be on there. And that would be a great resource to all be connected on one social network. And that's kind of a double whammy, which is a different question. But in terms of just all being connected as kind of a backup, aside from having, phone directory, which, I know is still in the process of being updated with correct contact info. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Great, Susan.
Okay, I'll address the second part of the question first. We do provide Niles with sick leave and health insurance, so he's covered in that regard. And he is happy to work in the office. As far as formalizing a role for a buddy system, I think it would be difficult. I applaud the idea of sort of initiating more networking among residents to look in on neighbors. I think it's one of the strengths of our community is that we are already so engaged. We have a generally very kind, very friendly, outgoing community. We do look after our neighbors and friends. so that I think there is a good system in place. It can always be amplified and improved upon, but it would be very difficult to actually formalize in any sort of legislative capacity. It's sort of a process to form committees. It seems that a more informal approach is better.
Okay, Monty.
Yes.
Arthur?
Yes.
Sorry. No, I apologize. I meant Arthur. I apologize. Arthur, the same question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Jeff's initiative is a model to look at for the future. And I agree with Susan's note that having a formal function within the village office is not something that we're set up to do. You know, we look after, you know, the trash pickup, recycling, and the road repaving. But at the same time, over the years, the office has served as an informal place for social gatherings and social advice. I see Gene Sperling here, who can attest to the fact that plenty of people will stop by or call, how do I get in touch with this service in the county? Or who do I call if I want a home nurse? What are the official services that are there? And I think we could make, and this has come up a number of times in the past year, that we could formally recognize this as a task for the village manager and to have a more organized way to provide this kind of advice, this kind of resource to residents. We have quite a number of older people in the community who seek this kind of help and support, as well as people of all ages who need to get in contact with authorities outside the village. And I think the village manager and the village office could be a center for doing that, in addition to the informal work that the residents do that Jeff has initiated. So yeah, I am in favor of that, and we've talked about it in passing, but not really formally at various village meetings. Thank you.
Great. So we will now turn to all of you for the first audience question. You know, we have a lot of written questions that I'm going through, and I think what we'll end up doing is consolidating based on topic. So unless there's disagreement, if we could try to stick with topics, I think that will help this conversation be a little more organized. So if we can stick with the current crisis, any questions pertaining to that, and then we'll move on from there. Were there any audience questions pertaining to anything that's already been discussed in terms of the crisis, benefits for the to the staff, conversations with neighbors?
Let's see.
Okay, any other issues that you all would like to raise then? This is really your opportunity to ask questions. So please do unmute yourself and please ask a question.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
We're the Goldberg family, and given the COVID crisis and pandemic we're going through, what about a village victory garden?
Village Hickory Garden. Okay, great. So does anyone have a related question? Okay, with that, we will turn to the candidates for the response. We will start with Monty, Susan, Arthur, and then Jeff. Monty.
I'm sorry. The question was, what about what kind of
Victory garden.
a victory garden?
For those who do not know what a victory garden is,
Thank you.
my father had one in the 1940s during the Second World War. It was to provide vegetables when the farmers could not get to work.
So,
This is where Arthur's experience is invaluable.
just for one quick second, I'm going to mute everyone again and then unmute the candidates. So just give me 1 second.
Okay, Niles, was
there
that,
we go.
I think there was an
Yep.
issue that Niles was trying to address. Yes, okay. I think there was an issue that Niles was trying to address.
Okay, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm trying
This is
to.
a great time for all of you to think about the questions that you'd like to ask going forward. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yeah. So
Okay, then we're going to continue.
hang on 1 second. I'm
Is
just
that okay?
trying. I'm just trying to get people on because everyone came back in at that point. And I'm just trying to make it easy for people. So I'm going to unmute the candidates if for those who are still
Okay.
unmuted. So just give me 1 second. Why is that not?
Okay.
Monty, could you try unmuting yourself?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead. We should be good. I just want to check one last thing.
Okay. So the question was what?
Yep.
The question was what about a victory garden, which thanks to Arthur, all of us now know has to do with providing vegetables to each other here in our village. I'm going to add to that question about the issue of composting, because this has been another initiative that we have just recently started. And there's a question about composting. Why are we paying separately for composting is the question. So I will turn this over. We're going to go back in order because we were interrupted, starting with Monty, Susan, Arthur, Jeff. The question relates to a victory garden and the issue of composting, why we pay for it separately, but your view on it in general.
I have no problem with the victory garden. I don't really have any thoughts beyond that. In terms of, I'm sorry, the second part of the question.
Composting. The question is the written question. Why are we paying separately for composting?
Right. So that is a very good question. I'm not really a composter. I don't know how. I think a handful of residents on Turner Lane are utilizing the compost initiative. I can't say I necessarily agree with it. I'm not really sure why we're paying additional funds for it, to be honest. To be very brutally honest.
Okay. Susan, over to you.
Okay, well, I love the idea of a victory garden. If only the village had a plot that we could appropriate for that very purpose. Maybe Lori would give us some of her garden. I don't know, maybe somebody would volunteer some space for vegetables. As for composting, I have to say I do have an opinion on it. It was kind of my baby because I think it is a great way to reduce landfill space. It's a good way to reduce our carbon footprint. We individual residents who do not participate are not actually paying anything. And in fact, if we could induce more residents to participate, the per household cost would diminish. Right now, I think it's $14 a month. If we were to get another 50 households, it would go to, maybe it's 16, it'd go to 14. I don't know. It's not a huge amount of money, and it actually reduces my 2-person household trash by at least 50%. So that's going to ultimately generate less stuff to the landfill and potentially reduce costs of waste management services if we're charged by the ton, if we're charged by volume. So I think it's a really great thing environmentally, and there's not really a huge downside, especially if the residents aren't paying. I mean, if the residents are paying only if they use the service.
Okay.
Great, Arthur.
Cheaper again.
Yeah. On the garden, I would follow what Susan said. If we had a plot, if you know of a lot that is coming open that you want to turn into a village park, this would be a perfect opportunity to devote some of it to playground, some of it to park, some of it to garden. The little plots that we have, the butterfly garden on the corner of Cummings and Brookville, and at the end of Raymond Street and Bradley, are too small, they're dark, they're not conducive to that, they're on the street. But it's something to think about. On the composting, the issue that comes up there is that less than 50% of the people have availed themselves of the composting service. And a number of people in the village survey said that the village should not pay for it as a common service because so few people would actually use it, and it would just subsidize the users. On trash and recycles, I think 100% of the residents use that, but it would be much less. So this is something we're going to have to talk about and consider in the future. If the popularity of it goes up and the costs come down, and if the cost came to zero to the residents, I wonder how many people would use it then and what the objections would be. But it's something to think about for the future.
Great, Jeff.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I grew up with my grandparents who were Depression era, so I certainly know the Victory Garden, and I'll just say off the cuff, a little tongue in cheek, that my daughter has a beautiful fairy garden in our back, and if we can't find a location, we're all welcome to use our backyard. But with that said, a little bit also tongue in cheek serious. I mean, look, I work in the federal government. If I listened to everyone who told me I can't do something because of some policy, I would never get out of the house in the morning. So I believe that, you know, if there's enough of consensus from the community, and I love the idea, frankly, because sometimes the little things are the things that can galvanize us. You know, like Monty, I mean, I think the effort around the fountain, things like that can really bring people together, even if they seem like they'd be relatively small. So I'm behind it, and if there's enough folks behind it, I'm sure we can find a way to make it happen. But like I said, fairy garden or bust on that. And then when it comes to the composting, look, our family is very green, and I know my wife has been behind this, and we think it's a fabulous service. But on a perhaps a serious note, knowing the times that we're living in, you know, most of our budget is derived from income tax. Now, I have no idea what this year will be in terms of the hit on our revenue. Now, with that said, we know we have a large reserve, but you know, I think we do need to look at some discretionary programs. Maybe I would love to see a slush fund, quite frankly, and take a poll from the community of things that they really care about and want. And maybe we can move forward on those, including composting. Over.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with communication. We've received We've received a few questions with regard to communication. The first is, what would you do as a council member to help residents communicate better with each other during this emergency? Right now, the listserv is the only way we can talk to each other as a whole community, but it is run by a private person and a lot of people aren't on it. Do you think it would be better to have a contractor run a regular village listserv so all the residents can share information with each other? We will start with Susan, go to Arthur, Jeff, and Monty. Susan.
It's an interesting idea. I don't know that that has actually been explored. I know that we've looked at trying to have separate Facebook accounts for the village, which were not well received, and other alternatives. But that might be something we could take a look at, having a contractor or some other alternative that would perhaps not be an official organ of the council, but would facilitate communication among residents.
Great. Arthur?
Yeah, this subject has come up numerous times in the past, and we don't have a solution to it. The constant contact, which is the service provider that the village uses to send out village-wide official emails and notices, has been one method of communication, but we don't have a back and forth way within the village, and it's something we've talked about. I think it does need some kind of a monitor. We've not had any council member volunteering so far to monitor such a service. Contracting it out is a possibility that we have not looked at. But it's a subject that keeps coming up over and over that we just have not solved or have come to any conclusion on. So we continue with the status quo on that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks so much. This is an area I'm very passionate about, and again, I want to thank the current members of the council because there was a meeting which I attended and shared the feedback from the community on this, and we worked out a couple ideas. The bottom line is, I think it's a fabulous idea, but I do think that we need to understand a little bit more of the data and what the data tells us, and by that is how many folks are actually on or connected versus not, and also get a little bit more information from the community about what is the preferred method that they would like. And it's easy enough to say, oh, we're going to, contract this out and do a listserv, but is that really going to be the solution that folks are going to all of a sudden get greater numbers of people on? So it's also about trusting the source of the information, who is running the listserv, and what is actually being posted to it that drives people to it. So bottom line is, I think it's a fabulous idea, but perhaps a little bit more information about what's the most effective method to connect folks in the immediate term. And it could be strengthening that buddy system using some telephonics, but then looking at this as perhaps an intermediate, longer term solution of understanding the needs of the community and the best form it could be, listserv or some other way. Over.
Thank you, Monty.
Yeah, I think the community listserv is a good idea. That's as long as it wasn't excessively expensive, and like what Jeff said, I think a survey would be smart to ensure we know, there's a huge demand for listserv. I definitely think there's a demand for, a social networking group, that is online, that's on an established. Like I said, maybe not Facebook, more so LinkedIn. I'm trying to think of other avenues, but I wouldn't be opposed. I think it'd be worth exploring, and I think the survey is something to look into for sure.
Great. At this time, we will turn to all of you for a community question. We'll start with if anyone has a communications question. Or a question related to that issue of communications. Okay. Any other questions at this time from the village? And don't forget to unmute if you are trying to ask a question. Okay, we have plenty of written questions, so I'm going to continue going through the written questions, but after each round, we're going to do this again. So continue to think of questions if you have them. Our next set of questions relate to the budget. So there are two that I'm going to put together. They are related. The first is, what would you do as a council member if the VMA's revenues fall by 20 or 30%? Use it to cut VMA's rainy day reserve fund, or cut the budget, or both? And if so, what budget items would you cut? And then there's a related question that is, how will the COVID-19 pandemic affect Martin's Addition's long-term finances? Personal taxable income will take a big hit, and property tax revenues may fall as well. How will that affect our long-term village revenues? We will start with Arthur, Jeff, Monty, and then Susan. Arthur.
Well, as the village treasurer, perhaps I have an advantage here that I've been going over the numbers and have looked very carefully at what we might expect. Yes, we are going to take a big hit. We have a reserve fund explicitly set aside for this that covers about a year and a half's ordinary spending at the rate we've been spending the last year. So we, in the short run of a year, we don't have to cut back. In the longer run, we would. Back 10 years ago, when the last recession hit, just as I was coming on the council, we had to dip into our reserves. We had to raise the property tax rate, which was the lowest in the state. And we also had to cut back on spending. And again, Gene was fully aware of everything that we were squeezing at the time. And anywhere we could, we squeezed. And we could do it again. I don't think we will have to do it for a while, but we are looking over every one of our expenditures to see what can go. Do we need every trash pickup that we have, every bulk pickup? That's one of our biggest expenditures, and so we'd have to look at things like that. But over the longer run, if this were to persist, our property tax once again is among the lowest in the state, and we would have to consider raising that again. So everything, raise taxes, cut spending, and use our reserves.
Thank you, Chap.
Thanks so much. And, from the heart, I thank Arthur, who I know, just looking at the numbers and the books and the prior work of the council, looking at the reserves, I mean, really, we're on good financial footing when you compare that certainly to other village or other entities within the county or perhaps even outside within the state. So I think we're in a good position, but that doesn't mean we don't need to take it with a serious look. I agree with Arthur. I mean, if you look at the largest budget line items, specific to waste collection and other places, maybe there are some creative ways we can think about those. I think at the same time, we want to be careful with budget items that, quite frankly, we know that need to not only stay intact, but perhaps even go up, such as for security, for police, other things. So I think it's continuing the course, like Arthur had mentioned, that to continue to look at some of those, what might be considered discretionary, but at the same time, being very careful and thoughtful about not just cutting programs for the sake of doing that. And I would say that if we needed to, we could dip into those reserves, have a hard line so that we know we're on good financial footing. I'm always reluctant about the idea of raising taxes. I think there are folks who ran for higher office. We know what happened to them when they promised that. So I think we'd want to perhaps, take a hard look at before we were to say something like that. Because if we needed to really look at this, it means that other folks in the community are having a hard time. So again, maybe there are possibilities of some grants and other funds that we could apply for at the county level. Over.
Thank you, Monty.
Yeah, I think if our budget fell by 20 to 30%, as Arthur and Jeff explained, the reserves are ample for us to kind of weather the storm. I definitely wouldn't want to increase taxes. I think most recently we paid $130 some odd $1,000 for trash and recycling collection. So perhaps that's something that we can bring down that cost. Thinking of public safety, I know we pay a couple police officers to do 10 hours of monitoring over the course of a month. How much that is helping the community, tough to say, because we've had, last year, that wave of robberies at every single business on Brookville Road. I know, the commercial center in La Ferme installed those security systems, but I think, it's a question of, do we need those 10 hours if they're not really helping, unless those 10 hours are spent with cruisers going up and down every street and we're really doing patrols. I think that would make more sense rather than having, I'm going off on a tangent here, but to be very honest, I think, there are a few things in the budget that we could cut before raising taxes. And I think for now, for the next foreseeable year, we'll be okay.
Thank you, Susan.
I would agree with everything, especially that Arthur said, since he is the treasurer and really has had a handle on it for quite some time. I think that the current council, over the past several years, in fact, has done a great job of building that reserve so that we are well positioned to weather at least a medium range storm of 1.5 years. If it goes beyond that, clearly we would need to dig deeper. Although I would just caution that cutting trash waste management services is not nearly as easy as it sounds. It seems like a big target that should yield great results, but it is not as easy as it might seem. But there would be ways that the budget could be reduced if absolutely necessary. Done.
Thank you. So because I had taken that one as a written question, again, I'll give anyone who would like the opportunity to ask a question themselves. I also want to just say that if some of you would prefer to send a written question at this time, as opposed to actually saying it, I'm going to, if you see your chat function, I'm going to send you my phone number where you could text your question. Okay, so in your chat, which is the bottom, it could blink orange. This is my phone number. So if you are dealing with other things, you don't want to unmute in your house, but you have a question, just text it to me. I will read it that way, no problem. I'm going to continue to do the written questions. So the next question also pertains to the budget. The current council treasurer has indicated that he anticipates routine village expenses will exceed income in the next fiscal year. One, are you afraid or are you aware of this forecast? And two, if elected, what will you do to ensure that the village remains on sound fiscal footing if and when that time comes? So for this one, we will start with Jeff, go to Monty, Susan, and Arthur.
Thanks for that question. And in many ways, I think it sort of it follows up nicely from the prior one. So again, let's commend our council members who are both running for re-election, but also over the years who put us on such sound fiscal responsibility that we actually have options to us. The short answer is, having looked at the numbers and you know, it's not a surprise, nor should it be, that we would be running perhaps some deficits in the years ahead.
We're not. They got that wrong. We're running a surplus. But go ahead.
If you have a rebuttal, we would wait till after the 2-minute answer. Keep going.
Well, surplus or deficit, I think we need to manage it in the same way under times where we know that we will have challenges, and we recognize that there will be. So again, just repeating the answer, or at least in a little bit different light, we should look very carefully again at the line items, both discretionary and other programs that we feel are mission critical around safety, preparedness, that perhaps we need to actually raise budgets, and we need to make some perhaps, I don't want to be, hard choices. I mean, this is something that we have to look at perhaps with a 2 or 3 year outlook. So perhaps with our reserves, this is more about some delicate choices. And then the ways of looking at the revenue, I mean, again, we have to look at it as it's a very, very finite set of places where income is coming in. So we will need to look very closely at some of those line items to really align with the fact that our revenue might be dropping over the next couple of years. Over.
Thank you. Arthur, we have you answering this one last, but if you'd like, you can have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, just very quickly. The questioners got that turned around. Our expected revenues are greater than our expected expenditures in the coming budget. We planned a surplus, not a deficit. That's all.
Thank you. Monty.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff in that I think we should be cautious. I would definitely want to take a look again at every line item and kind of think about if we need to something. But as Arthur just clarified, we're not facing the issue. So yeah, I would just be cautious, but probably without adding, considerably to any specific cause.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I think just reviewing carefully, but without assuming any harsh austerity program is in order. I think that we've been extremely conservative, extremely careful with discretionary items, and the necessary items we'll continue to negotiate to get the very best contract prices. So I'm sure that
got rid of the guy heading up the department focused on vaccine development in the middle of a novel coronavirus outbreak. But also anticipated that in January.
that's not me. I'm just wondering if that's
That sounds like Chris Hayes to me. It's Chris Hayes. I
You're right.
From CNN. So whoever said it, whoever's not muted, please mute, except for Susan. Susan, you still have time.
It wasn't me.
Oh, but you still have time on your answer if you wanted to complete it.
I think that's it. I mean, we've been fiscally responsible. We will continue to be.
Great. And Arthur.
I think I've said what I have to say about this. Most of our revenues come in from the state income tax, not the property tax, and doesn't seem to come from withholding taxes. So it's going to be when people finally file their returns next year and find out that the stock market has caused capital losses instead of capital gains. At least that's what the budget analysts at the state comptroller's office tell me. And so we should not be hit until well into next year.
Great. Thank you. Again, I will give everyone the opportunity to ask a question before we move on from the budget. Okay. Our next question pertains to speeding. I'm going to pull it up, and I'm having trouble pulling it up. One moment. If you are elected to the council, what steps would you take to reduce speeding in Martin's Additions? And we know this has been an issue that has been on the listserv lately. It's one that parents of young children, I think, are deeply concerned about. And I think some streets see it more than others. But certainly here on Turner Lane with the cul-de-sac, we see it quite a bit. So we'll start with Monty and go to Susan, Arthur, and Jeff. Monty.
Yeah, I want to work closely with the police, with the two hired officers that we have, and general, the county police department, with trying to figure out a way of, policing this a little bit better in terms of, I've seen it occasionally on Turner Lane, but more so when I first moved here. So it seems to have dissipated. But if it's problematic on, Brookville, it seems like we do have some police coverage there already. I don't know how often they're, ticketing if someone's rolling a stop sign or speeding through a stop sign or something like that. But I wouldn't be opposed to having those officers on streets that are needed, like Turner, if that's the case. But I don't think it's as big of an issue. And I have two young children myself. But that's kind of my viewpoint.
Thank you. Susan.
Well, there is a limit to what we can do in terms of controlling the speeding, as Arthur noted earlier, in terms of installing speed bumps or other mechanical constraints to speeding. We can't really lower the speed limits. As far as enforcement, when we've done traffic studies in the past, the results have suggested that people are not actually speeding drastically. There haven't, the perception is it's really fast, and I think it seems to feel faster if you have small children nearby. But I think that there is an assumption people are going faster than they really are. And so I think there's not a lot we can really do. Certainly we'll look into it. Certainly we'll confer with enforcement and traffic people. But That's it.
Okay, Arthur.
Yeah, as I had suggested in my first opening, the speed limit of 20 miles an hour is illegally the lowest we can go, but that's too fast. If you're standing on the side of the street and a car is going by on a narrow street at 20 miles an hour, it seems very fast. And about 85% in our traffic engineers who've measured this, 85% of the vehicles are within about 3 or 4 miles higher than 20%. So 20 miles an hour. So they're going at the most 23, 24 miles an hour. But that's too fast for safety. And the speed bumps, if you're going 20 miles an hour, the speed bumps really don't slow you down that much. So we're looking with our traffic engineer, with our walkability advisor, who's a city planner, who said himself he drove down the streets at 20 miles an hour and felt he was going dangerously fast. And what we could do about it, signs, according to our traffic engineer, get ignored. There may be other things, and this is what we will be exploring with the city planner, with others, in how to calm traffic, calm the speeds. And it's a challenge on the narrow streets that we have, where, especially the ones without sidewalks. So we recognize this as a continuing issue. Another one of those we just haven't solved yet. I'm not sure there is a solution, but we are continuing to look at it.
Great, Jeff.
Thanks so much. And certainly it's one of the biggest fears you have as a parent, especially of young children, let alone, just anyone in the neighborhood. And I can just remember over the years as Rosie has grown up, especially when she was young and she was still kind of, the directions from her parents were being ignored. And I know we're very lucky on our street, even though that we do have violations. There are other streets that don't end in a cul-de-sac like Turner. Like we have dear friends in Rollingwood where they're constantly shouting at cars that are speeding by. So we know this is a really serious issue. We want to do something about it before someone gets hurt or worse. The two quick things I'd say, first, I'm not an expert in this, but I did speak to some folks. My mother-in-law worked as director of government relations for Montgomery Village Foundation for many years. And she told me some of the things that they did. And so, for example, they worked with the local county officials because Turner would be a county run road. So there may be some things there we could work with them. And then as a community, in terms of the streets and roads, there are things that we could do. We also have to take some responsibility, perhaps, and just recognize with our kids and ourselves that we do have to be cautious and we don't live in a bubble. And also, I think, survey not only our community, but other communities that have dealt with this issue to find out more about solutions that are effective, as opposed to perhaps getting stuck in conducting another study that ends up, on someone's desk and we don't really have something that happens or works well for us. So again, it's an area that I would study up on quite a bit, but working with the county officials, both our own neighbor and neighborhood, and then surrounding communities about solutions they may have come up with. Over.
Great. I just want to make sure, Monty, you've started that round, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. Keeping it equitable here. Okay, so I want to give everyone the opportunity again to ask a question, starting with anything related to speeding or anything dangerous in the neighborhood or anything else. Okay, we will go to a written question. The next topic we're going to address is the issue of the 5G ordinance. So the person who submitted this question knew quite a bit about it. So we're going to, it's a 4-part question. I'm going to try to simplify it if I can. Zoning Text Amendment 19-07 has been proposed by the Montgomery County Council and would allow cell antennas, cell poles, and equipment cabinets to be placed within 30 feet of people's homes. The mayor of Somerset and numerous homeowner associations and individuals in Chevy Chase and across the county have opposed this amendment. As a VMA council member, your opposition would be valuable and persuasive to the county council. The first question here is, if you were elected to the council, would you consider opposing this amendment? The second question is, as a member of the council, would you be willing to propose or support a council resolution opposing the amendment? We will start with Susan, go to Arthur, Jeff, and Monty.
As with any proposed, as with any proposal, I would first want to have all of the facts. I'd want to look at all of the data. I'd want to understand what other communities have done. And based on the information provided, I don't really have enough information, but certainly I wouldn't take a position at the outset without reviewing and analyzing the information. So I wouldn't necessarily commit to doing so, nor would I refuse.
Okay, Jeff?
Who's next?
Jeff?
Okay.
Arthur, you are.
Me. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I agree with Susan. We have considered and passed one resolution on the small antennas for 5G. Anything new would come up, we would have to hear what the objections are, potential dangers, what the benefits might be. We have not gone through any of those procedures as of yet. So I don't know where I would stand on this, frankly.
Okay, Jeff.
Thanks so much. And I also, again, this is something that we know the community has spent so much involvement, information that's been shared. There are folks in our community who are so fluent in this. So I would certainly want to work with them to understand the issues, because I'm quite frankly, I'm not an environmental law person, but I am an epidemiologist. So from a personal perspective, you know, there are things about the ordinance that worry me, and I know my family is worried about it. So I would want to have more information about the impact of this. And, you know, without saying a definitive yes or no, I do think that we need to have more information, because, again, someone who spent their career in public health and seeing the effects of cell towers and other things that are sponsored within communities, it would worry me to move forward without a strong position, without having the proper data in hand. So I would be very full force in terms of understanding the issue more and understanding what the potential impact is. And bottom line, that whatever we do, it would be in the safety of our neighbors and our family. Over.
Thank you. Monty.
Yeah, I would agree with virtually everyone that I would want to get a lot more information, do a lot more analysis of it. I know there have been a few communities, Gaithersburg, Westminster, Maryland, that have banned it, I think. But obviously, you know, knowing more about any kind of health consequences would be good. I can't say definitively whether I'd be for or against it, but I'd want to know, certainly want to know a lot more. So I think it's worth researching.
Thank you. Okay, again, this is your chance. Any questions? Questions from the audience? Yes.
John McDonald, Summit Avenue. As to the 5G box issue, is there anyone aware of what the specifics are about positioning the box? Would it be on a telephone pole or on rods set in the ground?
Just to clarify, is this a question for all four candidates?
Yes.
Great. Okay, we will start with Arthur.
No. There have been different solutions. We've seen pictures of not fully fleshed out installations, kind of experimental ones. And some are on telephone poles, some are on dedicated poles. But I don't know. I have not looked into this in any more detail. And it was a year ago that we did this, so my memory is a little short on that.
Is Jeff up? I apologize. Oh, Haley, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, did you hear the question?
I believe so. So
It has to do with where they would be positioned, if you're aware. I think Mr. McDonald is wondering where these would be positioned.
yeah, I appreciate that. And again, this is an area I need to study up on. But my understanding, you know, and again, I'm privy to the information that others on the community listserv have shared, and I think there's this ordinance, the ZTA 19-07, and you know, the idea that of how proximal these boxes are to our residents and where they could be placed. And the bottom line is, you know, we do have other examples of other communities that have taken stronger stances on the placement of these boxes. And I think it is worth considering strongly, do we and our policies, do they align in the best way possible protecting our residents and their families? And if there are other examples that we could follow that perhaps could take a stronger stance and do that while not hurting businesses and other things, I'm all for it. Over.
Monty.
In reference to the question as to whether there'll be towers or on telephone poles, I'm not really sure about that either.
Susan.
I'm not either, and as I said before, clearly we would need to do a lot more research on this if it were to be reconsidered. So something to be determined.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is a resident question. A resident question that was texted to me. So this is another opportunity to encourage you all to consider texting a question. And if you want to leave it anonymous, as this resident does, I'm happy to do so. Again, my cell is in the chat function. It's 202-834-0867. Feel free to text me your question. This question is, where do you stand on making more sidewalks in the neighborhood? We will start with Jeff.
I was hoping you're going to go to Arthur on that one. We'll start with Jeff. Look, that's a contentious issue, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it's the truth. It's how I do everything. I mean, you know, in my job where I do a lot of global activities, working, you know, across over 50 countries, it gets down to, ironically enough, the village level. So, you know, the same thing goes here, is that really what do our communities want? On our street, we have a mix, right? On one side, we have a sidewalk and one we don't. And I think it's very effective. And having sidewalks certainly have significant benefits for the community, for young children. But at the same time, the idea of rezoning or, you know, putting sidewalks in places where they aren't, and if that's going to be doing something that completely disrupts the homeowners, you know, it's hard to really have a strong position on that. But with that said, like I said, I mean, if there were a strong movement from the community in certain streets to really want to move forward, I would certainly support some more research, but I defer to others on the council in terms of, that's a very, I think, detailed process to go through to plan that. So I think first we'd have to have more information about what does the community want, and then if it was really something that they wanted to move forward on, we'd really have to consult with the county and really understand how to make that a reality. Over.
Thank you, Monty.
Yeah, I think for the streets that don't have sidewalks, or, you know, as Jeff said, Turner Lane has it on one side. I think it would be definitely disruptive to, you know, homeowners in terms of having that parcel of land seized. But you know, if half of Turner Lane or whatever streets that require sidewalks had a survey go out and there was overwhelming demand for those sidewalks to be installed, and you know, I think cost aside, I think I'd be fine with it. I have the sidewalk on my side of the street on Turner, so But yeah, so I think it would be worth pursuing, but I think it is a delicate thing, delicate issue, particularly when neighbors would be losing some land.
Susan.
I agree. It's a very delicate issue. And I also agree with Jeff that it's a very contentious issue. I'm glad that the walkability team is addressing this because it is the sort of issue that really does need an impartial facilitator in the form of an expert as well as a panel of residents to really assess thoroughly. I don't have a strong position either way. As often occurs, I tend to be able to see both sides and hope that there is an equitable solution that can weigh both views and accommodate them, come to some sort of compromise, which may actually be what happens in this instance. There may be places where sidewalks are appropriate and places where it won't work.
And Arthur.
Yeah, we just had a walkability task force meeting just earlier this week where the city planner who we've hired to help us go through some of these went through his analysis and evaluation. It turns out there are things that we can do that are kind of low-hanging fruit in a way. If we could calm down the traffic, that would deal with many of the problems without having to take the village right-of-way that some people think of as their front lawns and use for sidewalks. Other things involve Brookville, the sidewalk on Brookville, which most people use to get to the village office and the shops. That is one of the most dangerous sectors, and something could be done with that to improve the walkability for the most people. But that involves working with the state, and because Brookville Road is a state highway. Now, our advisor has come up with some ideas. There's some areas of the road that are going unused that could be used as a barrier. We could squeeze in some of the right-of-way that the village actually has. So these are ongoing. Now, I just want to, there was one time years ago when there was one stretch of Bradley Lane that did not have a sidewalk on the north side of Bradley. If you walked down the street, all of a sudden you came to the end of the sidewalk and then picked up 2 properties beyond or so. There was a tree right there in the middle. I see my time is about up. There was a tree in the middle that stopped it. That tree came down. One day our contractor came by and he says, I have a load of concrete. I can give you some sidewalks cheap. And we decided to do it. We got an immediate call from the resident saying he was going to take us to court. We couldn't do it. How could we impose on his lawn, which wasn't his lawn? We did it anyway. And about 6 weeks later, I bumped into him and he said, what a great idea that was. Putting a sidewalk, it's worked terrifically. I didn't remind him that he was a guy who was going to take us to court over it. So these things can be emotional, but once you get through the emotion, sometimes the things work out. That's my view of sidewalks.
I'm muted. Thank you. Okay, because our last question was from the audience, we will now take a written question. And this pertains to pesticides. Pesticides kill bees and other pollinators and also cause cancer in people. Those chemicals don't go away. It's not good for us, our kids, our pets, to have stuff sprayed on our lawns or on our neighbors' lawns. If you are elected to the council, what would you do to encourage or require VMA residents to hire lawn care companies that do not use toxic chemicals? For this question, we will start with Monty. We will go to Susan, Arthur, and Jeff. Monty.
I don't think I would impose anything on anyone in terms of, not using chemicals. Obviously, I'm not opposed to encouraging residents to not go that route. I know there's certainly plenty of neighbors of mine that don't, but I don't think there's anything I would, push in terms of an initiative to get, collectively no one to use any kind of pesticide in the neighborhood. That's just my viewpoint.
Thank you, Susan.
This may be why we need to establish an environmental committee in the next council term. I don't think we're at a point where we would now encourage people not or dictate that people can't use pesticides. I certainly oppose them, although I think there is such a thing as neighborly shaming too. I think I think if you're aware of bees in the neighborhood, you might notify anyone who's using pesticides, just to be aware. Little pun.
We appreciate puns.
Thank you.
Okay. Arthur.
For the record, let me say I'm opposed to poisoning children and animals and other humans.
Very good.
But this issue came up about a year or so ago, and there was a question about actually whether we had the authority to do that. I think the authority to ban the use of chemicals falls under other jurisdictions than the village. But I think, as Susan has suggested, a more general look at our environmental policies within the village is called for, including both what the village does in its own work and in how we could work with residents to improve the overall environment.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks so much. And again, a bit biased because this is, being in epidemiology and focusing, I mean, this is something that my family cares very deeply about. We don't use any pesticides at all. And in fact, really it's when we walk around the neighborhood with our daughter and see the signs, it's just something that hits us in the gut. With that said, just like what makes us sad when someone buys a plot or a home and they take down a tree, we don't have a whole lot we can do. And Susan, I admire the idea of starting something around the, environmental concerns. I think that there are things we could do rather than be punitive. We could actually be rewarding. So, perhaps there are ways that we could reward neighbors around, those who make decisions. We could start with our own contracts, as Arthur said, around common areas, make sure that we actually eat from the same dish that we're asking others to. And I think the other piece, listen, we live in one of the most highly educated catchments in the entire country. If you look at just, number of college grads and higher, graduate degrees, I think if we were to look at this and we were to show that perhaps there's no difference in both cost and also outcome of using natural fertilizers, and we showed that information and we know that that is available, that folks may switch. This might be more about convenience and perhaps not even taking the time to realize there are effective, safe options. And if we were to perhaps make those more known, and again, some recognition, listen, we're the tree, tree city. Thank you so much. Let's be the, tree and green city. Why not? Let's add it to our sign. I wouldn't mind that.
Thank you. Monty.
I believe you started with me.
Indeed. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Over to all of you. Does anyone have a question? Hearing none, I will continue through the written questions. Our next question pertains to human resources and the village council staff. The village government has some serious personnel and HR problems this past year. Both of the staff members were suddenly fired in January. Do you have any HR management experience supervising employees? As a council member, would you make sure that we have good personnel procedures going forward? And finally, does VMA have a good personnel manual? For this question, we will start with Susan, go to Arthur, Jeff, and Monty. Susan.
Okay, well, I can only guess who the author of the question was, but I will,
I'll actually say we had multiple people submit.
so what I would say is, yes, we do have an updated personnel manual in place. We have been very, very fortunate in the village to have an incredibly strong manager for 3 years. And we did have a somewhat, and I think that we are back on track now. We have a very strong, very talented, very capable manager in Niles, and we're looking forward to at least 3 years, hopefully more, if he'll give them to us. So I think our village is in good hands. The village staff is extremely capable.
Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah, I think that all the current council members, as well as the candidates right now, have had a tremendous amount of management experience. And I will give some kudos to our chair, who I see sitting in front of me, to thank Tiffany Cisna in particular for professionalizing the operations within the council and within the operations of the village. And we are moving forward in doing just that, in how we create committees and how we deal with contracts and how we deal with personnel. Over the years, this has become more and more gradually professionalized. We are right now finishing up a contract, looking at our financial procedures. And I think we were a little surprised after we hired this person to look about at the things that we did not have control over. And now we have better visibility, better handle on what's going on. So the personnel issue is just one part of the management of village affairs, which I think as a whole are becoming more professionalized and on more solid ground as we move forward. Over the years, each of the councils that I've been on has made progress in doing that. I don't think it's going to stop now.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for the question. I think it's so critically important because for me personally, throughout my career, really human capital is the most important type of capital. And whether it's been, I've started up my own companies, I've started up my own nonprofit foundations, and now working in one of the biggest bureaucracies on the planet, it all comes down to, quite frankly, how you treat people. Because I think there's the expression that people know really well. People won't remember what you do or what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel. And so I think it's really important that we treat, the folks who help support us on a day-to-day basis, and make sure that they feel comfortable and secure, not only in their jobs, but in the policies that are there. And again, it's Niles is there, and these are conversations that we need to have both with our staff, but also perhaps look at the policies we have and compare them to other places. And it's not just a legalistic thing. I mean, you can have policies that kind of meet or even exceed other similar types of incorporated entities like our Village of Martin's Addition, but the real question is, how are we treating our staff? Are we treating them well? And so that's the philosophy that I take going into this election. Thanks. Over.
Thank you, Monty.
Yeah, I definitely have experience, obviously, with starting a few businesses, kind of like Jeff, but mainly management experience and with my multifamily background. And less so in my real estate. Like right now I have a real estate group, and there's, it's a group of two, so it's not as much in play. But I do believe that, that we're in good hands with Niles, and he obviously has a really impressive resume. I know we had kind of a rocky road with our last manager, assistant manager, which was definitely a shock hearing about that. I think in the future, if something were to come up, it would be great if issues, if issues arise, if they were kind of made known to, general residents, so we're not caught off guard. But yeah, I think, I would hope that we keep Niles, and if we end up hiring an assistant manager, that we pride ourselves on, keeping people in their positions and trying to work with them, rather than cleaning house, so to speak. But that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. I want to give everyone a chance to ask one last question. It is my understanding that we were supposed to end at 9. Can we get confirmation? Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So we're getting close. So over to everyone. Do you have any questions for the candidates at this time? Okay. So we have received one additional question, and I'm hoping that as we move to closing remarks, that the candidates could put it into their closing remarks. And because we're going to do it that way, I'm going to change the rules slightly and give everyone 2 minutes for their closing remarks, because this is also an audience question. So the audience question was, why do you want to serve on the council? Why are you running? So we'll give everyone 2 minutes to answer the question as a part of their closing remarks. We will start with Arthur, Jeff, Monty, and then Susan. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I have a lot to say, more to say about this. Sometimes it can be tedious. If you've ever gone and sat through an entire council meeting, you'll recognize that. But it's also rewarding. You see things happening, you see things improving. And I think it gives me a chance to put my background, my education, my training, my research, my analytical background to some effect. And I think my strength on the council is the ability to sum up what the issues are, to see what the evidence, and sometimes to say, these things are not solvable. Let's move on, and perhaps come back to it in a later date. So it's just the ability to serve the community and to bring some of my background and talents into play. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'll close with how I started, which is I want to really sincerely thank the Elections Committee for arranging this. This has been really, truly an outstanding forum to have an opportunity to meet and greet and discuss, I think, some real critical issues for our community. I mean, times are not usual. This is not business as usual. So again, I think you can see that from the questions that were asked insightfully, not only about the pandemic response, but safety, a lot of concerns that we have. So with that said, I think that leads into why am I here entertaining all of you fine folks this evening? And it's because I deeply care about our community. We're blessed. We know that, to be able to live here. We have amazing neighbors, type of neighbors that will let us know, they see something that doesn't look right, or there's a package, or I get back late from the office, or Michelle is also, at the office, and our recycling is taking out for us. I mean, it's the community that we live in. But with that said, why am I running now? It's because, look, I've also been very fortunate with the professional experience I've had. I've had very deep experience with business, managing fiscally large as well as smaller budgets, and also a background in pandemic and public health response. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a deep-seated love of the community, but also feeling humbly that I can contribute both in the immediate term and perhaps in the intermediate term as we all get past this time together, because that's what we need to do is be together, and then really look forward to other things that we can focus on, like victory gardens and fairy gardens and all those fun things. Thanks.
Thank you. Monty.
Yeah, mainly getting involved just to try to bring the community together on multiple levels, from the Fountain Initiative, I really do want to improve public safety, as that is a legitimate concern. Bringing together, formulating a networking group, all of these things collectively, having additional events. I think the Community Engagement Committee has done a really impressive job, for as long as I can remember. And, I think just anywhere I can offer, help to improve upon what we already have and continue on, with a lot of what we have that's good about this community that people love, and this is why they want to live here. I think, ultimately I want to give back to the community, and that's, I think, probably, speaking for myself, that's why I'm trying to get involved.
Thank you. Susan.
I'm running for re-election because I've had the experience of actually accomplishing many concrete tasks, such as street paving, for another pun, Haley. But I have been able to see a number of important projects to residents through to their fruition. It's very gratifying, although it can be contentious depending on the issue. It can be at times frustrating. It can be rather stressful. It's immensely rewarding. And I'm reminded of that. I think it's an Army quote. If not, somebody will know. But it's the toughest job you'll ever love. It really can be extremely stressful, but at the same time, just a great experience. And for that reason, I hope I'm reelected. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we really deeply appreciate everyone for participating tonight. It's great to see so many faces from our community here and others who have tuned in even without video. It's been a great turnout. It's been a good discussion. Thanks to all 4 candidates. It's not easy for these candidates to do this for an hour and a half, so thanks to all of you for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to the election.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you.
Great job. Appreciate
Good questions.
it.
Love you guys.
And thanks to the election committee for their success with the mail-in option.
We won't make anyone choose between their right to vote and their health. So we have figured this one out. Thanks to Marty for her leadership of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Good night.